I used to be a guy who was experiencing the world, and now I feel like the world and the universe experiencing a guy.
When the curtain goes down at the end of the drama, the hero and the villain step out hand in hand, and the audience applaud both. Because they know that the hero role and the villain role are only masks.
As an actor, you play characters, and then if you go deep enough into those characters, you realize that your own character is pretty thin to begin with, you know? And then you suddenly have this separation and go, well, who's Jim Carrey? Oh, he doesn't exist, actually.
And at a certain point, I realized, hey, wait a second, you know, if it's so easy to lose Jim Carrey, who the hell is Jim Carrey?
There's just a relative manifestation of consciousness appearing, and then somebody gave him a bunch of ideas. They gave him a name and a religion and a nationality, and he clustered those together into something that's supposed to be a personality. And it doesn't actually exist. And none of that stuff, if you drill down, is real.
And so you see behind the stage, too, there is the green room, where after the play is over and before it begins, the masks are taken off.
Dressing happens, doing hair happens, interviewing happens, and it happens without me, without the idea of a me.
You know, it's really, you know, the fact that we are already enlightened, we're already complete, and it's just realizing that you're complete. Once you realize you're complete, then this life and everything in it becomes a play of form, something to toy with and play with and make something good out of.
It's what's happening right now inside everybody is they're going, who am I? And they're depressed, you know, a lot of people, because they're trying to hold up an image in the world. And that's what depression is. You know, people go like, oh, Jim's been depressed and stuff. Well, yeah, I was depressed when I was trying to be the Wizard of Oz instead of the sweaty guy behind the curtain. But now I know that Oz is a character, you know. Everybody walks around and they go like, why am I depressed? Well, it's because you're trying to be something for the world, you know. And as soon as you let that go, better things happen, because they're just happening. And there's been a series of kind of awakenings I've had in my life, and you know, people chalk it up to depression and all that stuff. I think that, you know, grief and sadness and all those things are the ticket home to nothing. I think that was a part of the process. There's been several other awakenings, and yet still I have a lot of egoic attachments that pull my attention and focus. I think, you know, the right marriage with the right character and the right guy who's going through something is essential.
And so that behind the scene, that is to say, in reality, under the surface, you are all the actor, marvelously skilled in playing many parts and in getting lost in the mazes of your own minds and the entanglements of your own affairs, as if this were the most urgent thing going. But behind the scenes, in the green room, you always have a very tiny sneaking suspicion that you might not be the you that you think you are.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can we have everybody slide in real quick, and the TAs will slide in on the sides as well, and then there's more people coming in and they'll fill in the sides. So today I will be explaining Jim Carrey's awakening to some extent, if you're interested in that. And it actually has some origin with Gandhi, so we're going to tie this back to Gandhi as well. So last week we were talking about Gandhi, and there's this like big mystery that you have with Gandhi. And the starting place is, how did this bad lawyer, right? Remember, he's just a bad lawyer. He's not a great student. He's not a great lawyer. He can't even talk in court. How does this bad lawyer end up taking down the largest empire in the world? How does he free India? I think this is a remarkable story. And so journalists, of course, went to figure this out, and they would go visit Gandhi late in his life, and they wanted to know, like, how did this happen? Why was he able to transform? How was he able to do this? And Louis Fisher went to visit Gandhi. He's an American journalist. And what he was struck by was that Gandhi was not just an artist of politics. He wasn't just somebody who changed the world. He had figured out something about the art of living. Like, he lived with such joy and love that Louis Fisher just wanted to know how he did it, what was going on. So he asked him, can you tell me, like, what's your secret? Like, in 3 words, what's your secret? And Gandhi laughed a little bit, and he said, renounce and enjoy. Now, that actually has really deep meaning. That's a line from the Upanishads, a Hindu text from the 800 BC. These are almost 3,000 years old. And Gandhi was a student of the Upanishads as a Hindu himself. And he especially liked the Bhagavad Gita, which is about 2,000 years old and is sort of an extrapolation from the Upanishads. And what this means, what he said it means, is that in order to enjoy life, we cannot be selfishly attached to anything. That's the renounce part. And what he's saying is that when you're attached to things, you're actually imprisoned by them. You don't have your possessions have you. Now, what unfolds from a lifetime of trying to get rid of your attachments is the life of Gandhi. He wasn't perfect when he was young. He wasn't even very good at this when he was in his late 30s and early 40s. He was still practicing this. But through a lifetime of practice, he reached this level of joy and love that anybody could see it when they went to visit him late in his life. So what I want to do today is I want to invite you guys into the wisdom of the world. There's the Upanishads, of course, the Hindu text. There's Buddhism, there's Zen, there's Confucianism, there's Taoism. There's all these traditions out there, all these amazing wisdom traditions. And of course, there's the ones that we're more familiar with, Christianity, Judaism, and we could just go on and on with all of these great wisdom traditions. And I just want to give you a quick invitation to these and hope that you'll study more. If you're really interested in today's lecture, I do teach a class on religion and culture. And starting next year, it's going to be a 300 level class. It'll be similar to this. It'll be a pretty big class, probably about 200 people. So if you want to join that, I'd love to have you there. So here, I want to start with this quote from David Foster Wallace. This is from the same speech we saw earlier, This is Water, but this was not included in the short video. And you don't have to write this down. I'll just go through this with you. It says, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type of thing to worship, be it JC or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some inviolable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. He says, if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you'll end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They are the kind of worship you just gradually slip into, day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value, without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. So renounce and enjoy is this deep idea from the Upanishads that attachments are somehow a prison. And it's an alternative to the sort of pursuit of happiness that we have in our day-to-day life, which is sometimes just degraded into the pursuit of desire, pursuit of chasing that next thing that you want to have, or that fame or success or whatever it might be. And he's trying to move us past that. So Gandhi, throughout his life, nurtured what he called the law of love, which he drew from the Upanishads, but not only the Upanishads, but also the Sermon on the Mount. He encountered Christianity later in his life, and he found the Sermon on the Mount especially to be really powerful to him. And he took from this the law of love. And what he found in these, like merging these traditions of Hinduism and Christianity, he thought what you were really looking at was that you should have no attachments. This is to move beyond desire, to move beyond your selfish attachments, I should say, to have no fear, and then third, to look past duty. And what he meant by that is just don't do things just so other people will like you or because that's what you're told to do. You should act from your center. And so when put into action, these things look more like this. To act with no attachment is to act without focus on results. You focus on the thing you're doing. You don't focus on whether or not it will be successful. You don't worry about success. You don't worry about whether or not you're going to get, the accolades and all those things. You just work on it because you love it, and you embrace the love of doing the thing itself. Then he says you should act without fear. And so therefore you do the things that you might otherwise not do. You never let fear be your guide. And then finally, you act from your center, not by what others have told you to do. And he had a really simple way of saying this, and this is why he called it the law of love. He says, look, you can try to memorize all these things. You can try to think about how to act without focus on results, act without fear, act from your center, all that thing. But he said, really, all you have to remember is that no attachment means selfless love. No fear means selfless love. Acting out of not in terms of duty, means selfless love. It's all about limiting your own selfish desires, your own fears, which are attached to yourself, and then acting out of love for others. And he said that by living this way, he found freedom and love for himself. So it wasn't, in the end, it's this weird sort of thing that it's not, it's not like a bad thing, really. It turns out to be a very joyful thing for him to do this. Now, let's just look at his worldview, and let's enter into this different mindset, really, where Gandhi came from as a child. So he grew up with a Hindu worldview, and the Hindu worldview is different than the worldview most of you have in this room. So a lot of you hold a Christian worldview, and so we live in this world, and there's a God, and we sin, and we're trying to reach salvation, that kind of thing. In the Hindu worldview, we live in a multiverse of infinite cycles. That is that there are many, many universes. This isn't the only one. And they're constantly in cyclical reproduction. And so this universe will eventually die and then be recreated and so on. And we're just kind of trapped in all these cycles. And karma is this spiritual principle of cause and effect. So if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. And you actually get reincarnated lifetime after lifetime, in part based on your karma, like whether you did good things or bad things. Now, your dharma is sort of you living the right way and just like right on the path. You're centered, you're doing the right thing, you're doing the right thing for the people around you. This is the right way of living. But we are ultimately trapped in what's called samsara. Samsara is the cycles that just keep going and going, rebirth and rebirth and rebirth. And this world is full of suffering. So we would like to all transcend this in some way and get out of samsara. And so we're trapped in samsara until we achieve moksha, which is liberation. Now this is where it gets interesting, where it integrates into Gandhi's life, is he's trying to reach liberation, and there's a certain way you do that. So liberation is to move beyond fear and attachment. So there you start to see his law of love and where he's getting these ideas of the law of love. We're trying to get beyond fear and attachment. And then the goal is to recognize that yourself is actually part of a bigger self, which is sort of the oneness that connects all of us, that maybe this little self of me is actually an illusion, and in some sense we're all deeply connected. And so Atman, which is this big self, is equivalent with God, the Brahman, like in a sense, like the God is all that is, and what your goal is for liberation is to identify with the one, this God or the great self. And this is achieved through yoga, love, meditation, and service. So this is where Hindus get their, this is the worldview, and then this is where their morality comes from and their sense of service to others. And they get there through meditation, service, love, yoga, and so on. So I just share with you a really quick creation story just to give you a sense of this worldview and how it's different than ours. So in, say, the Judeo-Christian world, God creates the world in 7 days and so on, and God actually is apart from the world and creates the world. In the Upanishads, there's a different story in which, in the beginning, there's just a oneness. There's no difference between anything. It's just a oneness, and it's called the self. It's called the Atman, the great oneness that's everything. And the oneness is sitting there, and the oneness, being all alone, starts to feel afraid. And the oneness sits there kind of having this fear feeling, and then realizes, like, what am I afraid of? I'm the only thing there is. And so the oneness stops being afraid, but then the oneness starts to feel lonely and starts to desire another. And so the oneness splits itself into two, and desiring the other then connects with the other, and they produce more things. And then the thing that they create, then the one person that they've created turns into something else, and it basically just goes back and forth, where this person turns into a person, then a cow, then a pig, and then so on, and every time they desire one another and create all the cows, and then they create all the pigs, and then they create everything. And so the idea is that everything came out of the oneness. This is the creation story of the Upanishads. Now that can sound kind of crazy and unscientific and all that, but they don't really take it as literal. They take it as a metaphor. And the metaphor is that in the beginning there was the oneness, and fear and desire created all of these things that we see around us. And if we can move past fear and desire, we can see that we're actually directly connected and actually intimately connected with all the things and all the people around us. So they don't take it literally, they take it as a metaphor and a way of seeing through that fear and desire are the keys. And so again, back to Gandhi's law of love, you see why he was so attuned to this idea of moving past attachment and moving past fear. And so that led him to have these experiments in truth, which we talked about last time. That satyagraha is just holding fast to the truth being that we're actually all one. And when we do that, he wants nothing for himself. And just like, now walk through his life with him. If you can imagine, it takes years and years of practice, but over time, he starts wanting less and less for himself. He moves past fear and desire. And over the decades, he eventually kind of dissolves his whole sense of self. That's a state of consciousness that, you know, we really have a hard time imagining, although I imagine that some of you have probably felt it now and then. Like you might have felt some sort of religious-like experience. It might even be like at a concert or something where you feel like this elation and you sort of feel deeply connected to the people around you. That's that sense of no self that Gandhi held with him through his whole life, later in his life at least. And so he felt a sense of oneness with the world, including his enemies, and this is why he could be so loving toward his enemies as well. So ultimately, though, Gandhi also wanted to say one other piece, and that was that throughout his life, he moved toward an integration of mind, body, and spirit, which was, he noted that most people are actually split in this regard, which is to say, if you think of like your mind as what you think and your body as what you do, a lot of people are split in this because they think one thing and then they do something else. They hold to certain beliefs, but then they act in another way. And then they feel bad and they feel somehow alienated from themselves. And then, of course, there's also spirit, which is the feeling piece. And if you don't think, act, and feel in unity, like if those three things aren't tightly interwound, you start to fall apart. And so this is why Gandhi always tried to live for others and not live for himself, because living for yourself can ultimately split you apart because you start acting selfishly and thinking another way and feeling another way, and you start to fall apart. So his favorite line from the Bhagavad Gita is this. He says, "They are forever free who have broken out of the ego cage of I and mine to be united with the Lord of love." And so love is what he holds above all else. Now there is, this now leads us to a moment that happened in the last few months in which Jim Carrey walked onto a red carpet and did this.
Hey, Jim Carrey. Yes.
What?
I've covered a lot of fashion weeks. This is the first time I've run into Jim Carrey. Wait, tell me, is it true you're wandering the streets? You need a date to the party? What's up?
No. I'm doing just fine. I just, there's no meaning to any of this. So I wanted to find the most meaningless thing that I could come to and join. And here I am. I don't believe in icons. I don't believe in personalities. I believe that peace lies beyond personality, beyond invention and disguise, beyond the red S that you wear on your chest that makes bullets bounce off. And I don't care.
But Jim, you got really dressed up for the occasion. You look good.
No, I didn't
that an
get dressed
accident?
up. I didn't get dressed up.
Who did?
There is no me.
There's no you.
No.
We're not here. This is a dream?
There's just things happening. It's not our world.
None
That's
of this
the
is
key.
real?
Nope.
So you're just passing
We don't
through.
matter. We don't matter.
Oh, wow.
There's the good news.
Okay.
All right. So then there's like these debates. If you watch this stuff on YouTube or seen it on Instagram, you'll just see like all these comments, and some people think he's crazy, and some people think he's woke, right? Woke meaning like enlightened and so on, right? So I'm going to try to decode what's going on with Jim Carrey here by looking back at some of his recent stuff over the last few years and drawing you into what he's trying to say. So first off, I want to point out that Jim Carrey has definitely studied Hinduism and understands this idea of the self, like the big self as more than just like our little selves. Here he is talking about that at a graduation ceremony.
Because life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. How do I know this? I don't, but I'm making sound, and that's the important thing. That's what I'm here to do. Sometimes I think that's the only thing that's important, really, you know? It's just letting each other know we're here, reminding each other that we're part of a larger self. I used to think Jim Carrey is all that I was. Just a flickering light, a dancing shadow, the great nothing masquerading as something you can name. Seeking shelter in caves and foxholes dug out hastily, an archer searching for his target in the mirror, wounded only by my own arrows, begging to be enslaved, pleading for my chains, blinded by longing and tripping over paradise. Can I get an amen? You didn't think I could be serious, did you?
All right, so let's look at this in terms of Gandhi's law of love. He's actually like dealing with the same sort of spiritual laws or rules, you might say. So when he, like no attachments, he talks about being blinded by longing. When he talks about no fear, he says seeking shelter in caves and foxholes. He talks about duty. He's talking about tripping over paradise. He's suggesting here that we're actually already potentially like right there if we just like, we're already enlightened in a sense if we just let ourselves feel that enlightenment, let ourselves understand how we're all deeply connected. So Jim Carrey, if you don't know his history, he kind of went on this search for identity as he was playing all these different roles and realizing that the roles, they sort of, he started to sort of wrestle with identity himself, like who am I if I'm not the Mask or if I'm not, the Truman in the Truman Show or whatever. He started to feel like this sort of unease with his own identity. And so he goes on this search.
And that's when my search for identity deepened. I wondered who I'd be without my fame. Who would I be if I said things that people didn't want to hear? Or if I defied their expectations of me? What if I showed up to the party without my Mardi Gras mask and refused to flash my breasts for a handful of beads? I'll give you a moment to wipe that image out of your mind. But you guys are so ahead of the game. You already know who you are. And that peace that we're after lies somewhere beyond personality, beyond the perception of others, beyond invention and disguise, even beyond effort itself. You can join the game, fight the wars, play with form all you want, but to find real peace, you have to let the armor go. Your need for acceptance can make you invisible in this world.
This is actually really deep and powerful stuff that he's saying here. And it again ties back to this essential law of love, right? The no attachments piece, he talks about beyond the perception of others, beyond anything that would give you like fame or success, those types of things. He's saying like, don't be attached to that. You have to move beyond those things. Yeah, and in terms of fear, he says you have to let the armor go. Just think of all the stuff that we all put in front of us to protect ourselves. And it's all protecting the ego, right? Which is very fragile. We don't want to get hurt. And so we put all this armor up to protect ourselves. And a lot of that armor is just, sort of fakeness. It's not who we truly are. And then finally, beyond duty, he's saying your need for acceptance can make you invisible in this world. Duty here being like your duty to like be, what society wants you to be. So your need for acceptance ultimately makes you invisible because you just end up kind of disappearing and not really being you. The real you isn't there anymore. And so now one of the things that both Gandhi and Jim Carrey are going to talk about is the importance of centering yourself and having some sort of daily practice that can center yourself. And so they focus on meditation. At this school where Jim Carrey is speaking, they actually have two times a day where they call off all classes and students go meditate. It's kind of an amazing school. It's in Iowa, if you're interested. It's kind of an amazing idea, right? That you just call off school, everybody go meditate. And they do this so that people can be more centered. And this is what he says to them about this.
It does allow you to separate who you truly are and what's real from the stories that run through your head. You have given them the ability to walk behind the mind's elaborate set decoration and to see that there's a huge difference between a dog that is going to eat you in your mind and an actual dog that is going to eat you. That may sound like no big deal, but many never learn that distinction. And they spend a great deal of their lives living in fight or flight response. Now, fear is going to be a player in your life, but you get to decide how much. You can spend your whole life imagining ghosts, worrying about the pathway to the future, but all there will ever be is what's happening here, and the decisions we make in this moment, which are based in either love or fear.
So now think about what he's saying there. He's saying most of us have all these anxieties, and essentially we're constantly imagining a dog that's going to eat us, even though there's not a dog that's going to eat us. And so then we have a stress response, and we all know what that feels like. A lot of us, most of us, live with a continuous stress response. We continuously live in fight or flight. That means we're also acting out of fear because we're acting from within that space. So if we instead can calm ourselves, and if that takes meditation or a run or whatever it takes, you can then get to a place of love, a place of peace, and then act from there instead. And he says your decisions will always be based on either love or fear. So how can we make sure that we're always making our decisions out of love rather than out of fear? So then he also says some things about Dharma, or we talked about Dharma as being like when you're right with the world and you're just living exactly the right way. And the Christian notion of this is this idea of vocation, where you're called or summoned to do something, and it's like kind of listening for the voice of the world. The secular version of this is looking at where your talents meet the world's needs, and just kind of opening up to the world and listening to the world to see where your talents meet the world's needs. This is what he has to say about that.
My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that that was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job. And our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love. It's not the only thing he taught me, though. I watched the effect of my father's love and humor and how it altered the world around me. And I thought, that's something to do. That's something worth my time. It wasn't long before I started acting up. People would come over to the house and they'd be greeted by a 7-year-old throwing himself down a large flight of stairs. They would say, "What happened?" And I would say, "I don't know. Let's check the replay." I'd go back to the top of the stairs and come back down in slow motion. It was a very strange household. My father used to brag that I wasn't a ham, I was the whole pig. And he treated my talent as if it was his second chance. When I was about 28, after a decade as a professional comedian, I realized one night in LA that the purpose of my life had always been to free people from concern, just like my dad. And when I realized this, I dubbed my new devotion the Church of Freedom from Concern. The Church of FFC. And I dedicated myself to that ministry. What's yours? How will you serve the world? What do they need that your talent can provide? That's all you have to figure out. As someone who's done what you're about to go and do, I can tell you from experience, the effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is.
So a few really great lines you saw in there, like you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love. So again, this is fear versus love, right? The thing that you don't want to do, the thing you feel compelled to do, the duty that you have to do is the fear response. But there's this other response which comes from love. And I think there's a really interesting piece here, because I know a lot of you are kind of figuring out what you're going to do with your life. And he has this line, what's your ministry? Like what is it that you want to do? And you notice that the freeing people from concern, that is not an actual job in the world, right? That's not a job in the world. But he can practice that ministry in all kinds of ways. He could have been a teacher. He could have been any number of things, not just a comedian. And so one of the key things in sort of figuring out what it is that you're meant to do or you're supposed to do or finding your calling, whatever it is not just looking for a job title. It's actually looking for a very specific thing that you just love to do. And it can be super specific. It can be, helping others through breakups. It can be any number of things that you find yourself doing and loving to do. And then looking around the world, so what do they need, the world? What does the world need that your talent can provide? So then I want to show three more short clips from Jim Carrey. The first one is kind of getting down on this overcoming attachment, moving past desire.
Because everything you gain in life will rot and fall apart, and all that will be left of you is what was in your heart. My choosing to free people from concern got me to the top of a mountain. Look where I am. Look what I get to do. Everywhere I go. I'm going to get emotional because when I tap into this, it really is extraordinary to me. I did something that made people present their best selves to me wherever I go.
So you heard him talk about how all the attachments just melt away and all that's left is what's in your heart. And then overcoming fear.
Risk being seen in all of your glory. It's not big enough. This painting is big for a reason. It's called High Visibility. It's about picking up the light and daring to be seen. Here's the tricky part. Everyone is attracted to the light. The party host up at the top, who thinks unconsciousness is bliss and is always offering to drink from the bottles that empty you. Misery below her. Despises the light, can't stand when you're doing well, wishes you nothing but the worst. The Queen of Diamonds, under him, needs a king to build her house of cards. And the hollow one down bottom there will cling to your leg and say, please don't leave me behind, for I have abandoned myself.
And you can see this is just a beautiful image of transcending fear and desire and letting your light come out, right? I mean, the desire piece is there, the fear is there. And it's all about centering yourself and moving with the light through. So finally, it's this bit about overcoming duty and social concern. He has one final thing to say here.
I've often said that I wished people could realize all their dreams and wealth and fame, and so that they could see that it's not where you're going to find your sense of completion. Like many of you, I was concerned about going out into the world and doing something bigger than myself, until someone smarter than myself made me realize that there is nothing bigger than myself. Our eyes are not viewers, they're also projectors that are running a second story over the picture that we see in front of us all the time. Fear is writing that script, and the working title is I'll Never Be Enough. Now you're going to look at a person like me and say, how could we ever hope to reach those kind of heights, Jim? How can we make a painting that's too big for our home? How do you fly so high without a special breathing apparatus? This is the voice of the ego. And if you listen to it, there will always be someone who's doing better than you. No matter what you gain, ego will not let you rest. It will tell you that you cannot stop until you've left an indelible mark on the earth, until you've achieved immortality. How tricky is this ego that it would tempt us with the promise of something we already possess?
So that's a really deep line. It would take a whole semester to unpack, and that's where I'll just invite you to come to my class next year. It'll start in the fall next year, Anth 3:14. But here's the line: how tricky is the ego that it would tempt us with something we already possess? And what he was referring to is immortality. Was referring to, but here immortality doesn't mean like life ever after in heaven. It means sort of a sense of everlasting life and abundance right here and right now. It's this notion of true freedom that Gandhi loved so much in the Bhagavad Gita. I mentioned earlier this line, "They are forever free who have broken out of the ego cage of I and mine to be united with the Lord of love." And he says, this is the supreme state, attain to this and pass from death to immortality. So Gandhi's law of love, as we saw, and we heard Jim Carrey sort of elaborating on this, is also found in other religions, like Buddhism, for example. And it's so clear in Buddhism, right from the beginning, the story that is the foundation of Buddhism is the story of Siddhartha, the Buddha, going and sitting under this tree of illumination. He's traveled for many, many years and sought different teachers over all this time and has never found enlightenment. And finally, he sits down underneath this tree and he sits there for several weeks trying to reach enlightenment. And then finally, he's right on the brink of enlightenment. And this devil-like figure comes to him to try to stop him from enlightenment. And he comes with an army of fear, you can see there, and the Buddha is not afraid. And so the arrows that come at him just turn into lotus flowers and fall around him harmless. And then the devil sends these beautiful women, and this represents desire and attachment and ego lust and things like that. And again, the Buddha is so centered that nothing phases him, and so they fail as well. And then the final temptation is to be a god who can be worshipped by others, to serve his, clearly you're the enlightened one, why don't you go and let people pray to you? And he says, that's not what this is about. This isn't about me serving and being worshipped. This is about something else. This is about helping other people transcend fear, desire, and duty. And this is what Buddhism is all about. And so it starts to spread, and you can see just how successful it was when you see the sort of remnants of it spread, and then into China. I mean, this looks like a fantasy land, but these are Buddhist temples spread across the landscape in Myanmar, dating from about 1,200 years ago. I mean, it's just, I don't know how you feel looking at this, but it's just absolutely stunning to think about of temples that are in this small area, all of these people at that particular time practicing Buddhism, this way of moving past fear, desire, and duty that the Buddha had started. And when it spread into China, it combined with other things, and we get different versions of Buddhism. This is a really beautiful rendition of it. This is the Dance of a Thousand Hands in China. And this is a person who's become enlightened, is waiting at the gates, and they're drawing you in to the enlightened space. And you see the quote there, as long as you are kind and there's love in your heart, 1,000 hands will naturally come to your aid. So this dance is representing those hands reaching out to you. But it also says, as long as you are kind and there's love in your heart, you will reach out to others with 1,000 hands to help others. Just a gorgeous representation of connection and the power of kindness and love to help one another. So I want to take you a little deeper into Buddhism, just share with you kind of the way they talk about moving toward enlightenment. So to get towards this state beyond fear and desire in Buddhism, there's the Eightfold Path. And I don't really want you to just memorize these 8 things. That would be too much and not really worth it. What really matters is that you get the gist of it. So let me go through the Eightfold Path and I'll give you the gist of it. So the Eightfold Path is you have to have right views, right intent, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and finally right concentration. So these are the 8 things. But I just want to break these down into the 3 elements so that you get the gist of it. The 3 elements, as you can see, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, that's all about what's in your head. That's about being mentally disciplined, right? And then you see right speech, right conduct, right livelihood. That's all about action. And specifically acting through compassion. And then finally, right views, right intent. That's all about belief. That's about where you stand on things. What are your views and what are your intentions? And that's all about wisdom. So for Buddhists, it's all about practicing wisdom, practicing compassion, and practicing this mental discipline. And what Buddhism is probably most famous for, and their biggest impact on us here, is their approach to mental discipline and mindfulness. I'll just show you a quick introduction here to mindfulness. You've probably heard of mindfulness before, and it came from Buddhism. So here's some everyday benefits of mindfulness.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you.
And that's where we're at, right? I mean, it really is just so useful, and so many people are now doing it and reaping the benefits of it, that it is becoming kind of this daily practice for a lot of people. And then I want to just cover one other practice, and this is Zen. And in a way, if you're not familiar with these practices, we basically just moved from India through China, and now we're heading into Japan. And Zen is a Japanese word, and it captures this essence of Buddhism, you might say. So the origins of Zen come from this guy named Bodhidharma. In China, he was called Dhammo. So he came from India, walked into China. And some interesting things about him, when he came into China, he'd see all these temples, and he would say, hey, what about, Buddhism is supposed to be all about lack of attachment and that kind of thing. And yet you're like celebrating all these things with these huge temples. This doesn't seem quite right. Like we should be more humble and in service to others, not just building these big temples. And so he ended up going into a cave, and he just lived in this cave for 9 years. And people knew he was this great spiritual leader, but he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't say anything. And he was so dedicated to meditation that he actually cut his eyelids off. This is all a story, of course, like he probably didn't actually do this, but he cut his eyelids off. And that's why he always appears like this with these giant eyes wide open. And this is so he could meditate on and on and on throughout the day and night. And there are these dolls made of him, and you can find these in Japan and other places. These are called Daruma dolls. And Japanese people will buy these and fill in, they come with eyes that aren't filled in, and so you fill in one eye, and as you do that, you think about some goal that you're trying to achieve, and then you don't fill in the other eye until you achieve the goal. And then at the end of the year, you gather up all of the Daruma dolls from the whole community, and they put them in a big pile, and they celebrate the things that they've accomplished throughout the year, and they give thanks to this sort of feeling they got from the Bodhidharma, and they burn these things together as they celebrate the previous year. Now, Bodhidharma, though, as I said, his teachings were pretty interesting. It's called the Way of Zen, and the Way of Zen is as follows, that things are things. That's the simplest way of talking about Zen, is that things that we see around us are actually things. What does that mean? It means that they're not really anything until you think about them in a certain way. And so as we identify them as a thing, they become a thing. They're not actually a thing until you think of those things. The easiest way to think about this is like, is something actually good or bad, or is it only good or bad when you apply judgment to it? And the idea is that maybe the thing itself isn't good or bad, and your thinking brings goodness or badness to it. So what he says is that the goal is to see beyond things and things. And then once you can do this, then you have this immediate experience of what's called the suchness. This goes back to the Hindu idea of the self, this capital S self that's connecting all of us, the oneness, you might say. It's only when we think about things as things that we separate them from other things. And the idea here is that you can have this immediate experience of the suchness, which is sometimes called satori, which is enlightenment. So in the Zen version of enlightenment, it's satori that you're trying to achieve. And Bodhidharma is very important for another reason as well, though, and that is so it is because he starts this way of Zen. This ultimately spreads not only around Japan and China, but then also grabs hold of some people in the West, including Alan Watts, who then brings it to the United States. And this is a little bit here about Alan Watts sort of summarizing the way of Zen and what it means for the self.
You're ready to wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not ready, you're going to stay pretending that you're just a little, poor little me. And since you're all here and engaged in this sort of inquiry and listening to this sort of lecture, I assume that you're all on the process of waking up. Or else you're teasing yourselves with some kind of flirtation with waking up, which you're not serious about. But I assume maybe you are, not serious but sincere, that you are ready to wake up. So then, when you're in the way of waking up and finding out who you really are, what you do is what the whole universe is doing at the place you call here and now. You are something the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real deep down you is the whole universe.
So this is the quintessential wisdom of Zen, is that, and this is actually in a strange way true, no matter what your belief system is that because all of us are manifestations of matter, and all matter ultimately came from the stars, in a way we are all made of stars, like we actually are what the universe is doing right now. That's the idea behind Zen and the way Alan Watts has interpreted it. So he says the real you, he says you are what the universe is doing at a particular place and time, in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. And we only, like, in a way, like we're like a drop that emerges out of the ocean, and we identify with our dropness. But of course, we're only a drop for a very brief moment of time. In the grand scheme of universal history of, say, 14 billion years, we're just a drop for a little bit of time. And then, 100 years from now, you and I mean, it's kind of amazing, but materially, we will be worm food, right? Like, at least materially. Now, we can talk and debate about where we're going to be spiritually. That's another debate. But in the material us is actually just like the drop of ocean that comes out and then emerges back into that ocean again. And so this, because of this fact, this truth, the Bodhidharma preached non-attachment, and he wouldn't talk to anybody until one day a guy sat outside of his cave for many years wishing to be taught. And finally, in frustration, he cut off his own arm to demonstrate how little he was attached to the things of this world, and presented his arm to Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma's like, okay, I'll teach you now. And what Bodhidharma taught him was that this way of enlightenment wasn't just about thinking. You can't think your way into this place. You have to actually do things and move. And he taught this way of movement, which became Shaolin Kung Fu. His cave was just outside of Shaolin, and it became the foundation for Shaolin Kung Fu, which is the foundation for many other movements that we see around the world. And so he taught these 18 movements, which are the 18 movements of the enlightened ones. But most important, he was saying that this is about integration of mind, body, and spirit, and integration of thinking, doing, and feeling. And that's where it wraps all the way back to Gandhi's law of love, and the integration of the self, and recognizing not just our oneness of self, but also oneness with one another as well. So for your final bit, you can, I'm just curious on your own reflections on moving past fear, desire, and duty, and what it would mean for you to move past fear, desire, and duty. This is a precursor to your hero story, which is worth 100 points and is due after fall break. So it's a pretty big assignment. 100 points is equivalent to a exam, so it's very significant. And one of the key things you'll have to think about for your hero story is, where are your fears? What are your attachments? What does your life look like if you move past fear and attachment? And have you already moved past fear and attachment? Or are you still wrestling with that?
Keep my faith.